Hello, this is BBC News. Welcome if you're watching here in the UK or around the world. I'm Ben Brown. Our top stories. Russian military strikes cause more damage near Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, as forces push into new areas across the country. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky remains defiant.
100% we're confident that they will win, there will be victory, but 100% we don't really know when it happens.
Ukraine says Russian troops have captured the eastern outskirts of the besieged city of Mariupol, one of Moscow's main targets. A three-way phone call between President Macron, the Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the German Chancellor has been described as difficult, with the French saying that Mr. Putin did not show any willingness to end the war. Poland's parliament has passed emergency legislation that allows Ukrainians fleeing the war the right to live and work in Poland for 18 months. Hello, more fighting's been taking place outside the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, where Russian forces are around 15 miles from the city centre. British military intelligence believes those Russian troops have been regrouping, possibly for a fresh offensive in the coming days. Well, a military airfield was destroyed this morning near the capital. The latest information about Russian positions is shown here on this map in red. Outside the capital, the cities of Chernihiv, Sumy and Kharkiv continue to be shelled, while the Ukrainian military say the eastern outskirts of the besieged city of Mariupol have been captured by Russian troops. The city has endured days of very heavy shelling. President Zelensky of Ukraine has said that Russian and Ukrainian negotiating teams have started discussing what he called concrete topics rather than exchanging ultimatums. Meanwhile, the French President Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz have held talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. We'll have more on that shortly. First, though, our report tonight is from Jeremy Bowen on the outskirts of Kyiv.
Pictures of Russian forces, time and place indeterminate, emerge from their side. Among their potential targets here in Kyiv, no one knows their precise orders, but they're assuming an attack is coming. On the Ukrainian side, they're trying to make checkpoints into real obstacles. The professionals are a few miles closer to the Russians. The soldiers here are all volunteers, but they are still expected to fight, even with only a few days' training. Just over a week ago, I met two university friends, Maxim, aged 19, and Dmitro, 18, as they signed up in Kyiv. What do you study?
I'm studying economy.
And I'm studying biology.
Most of the recruits that day were about the same age, making jokes to hide their nerves. When they lined up outside, they looked as if they were off to a festival, except for the guns. Now Dmitro and Maxim have been given uniforms, 3 days training, and they're facing the Russians.
Pretty get used to my gun. I learned how to shoot and like act in the battle. Also, many other things that will be very crucial during the fight with some Russians.
I feel much more confident than I was before, because we get enough knowledge in tactics.
Do you think the battle is coming for Kyiv?
Yeah, it's definitely possible, but we just have to stop them here in Brovary, because if they get to Kiev, this war probably might be over.
What do your parents think about what you're doing?
Mom, I'm on the war. I'm fighting with the gun in my hands. And she said, "Oh, Maxim,
Nice joke.
don't joke with your mother. It's war. Just sit in the shelter and do your work, volunteer or do something else."
Do you feel scared?
Not much, but it's human nature to feel scared, and of course deeply in my soul I feel a bit scared, because no one wants to die, even if it's for your country. So death is not an option for us.
For now, they're on the checkpoint. If the Russians come, they'll be firing out of a trench in the war's key battle.
War always has a political as well as a military dimension. While President Zelensky and his government are here in Kyiv, no one can say that they've been defeated, even if they're losing territory elsewhere. At the same time, President Putin cannot claim victory in this war if his men can't take this city.
Everyone here is waiting. Soldiers, civilians in and out of uniform, and Maxim and Dmytro. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, let's take a look at the wider situation across Ukraine. My colleague Yalda Hakim is in the west of the country, in the city of Lviv.
The last 24 hours, things have intensified here in the west. If you look at a map of the country, you can see Russian presence and bombardment in the north, in the east and in the south. And we can talk more about the besieged city of Mariupol in a moment. But in the last 48 hours, we've continued to see more airstrikes taking place in the west of the country, in a city called Lutsk, which is just northwest of here. A military airbase was struck there, and we understand some Ukrainian soldiers were killed, and we haven't heard about any casualties for civilians. But that does make people here in Lviv very nervous, because up until now, this part of the country has remained untouched. We haven't had Russian bombing or shelling, for example. There hasn't been any fighting, although people are desperately here trying to protect monuments, ancient monuments, the Greek gods that exist. This is a World UNESCO Heritage Site, so people are very concerned. In the Second World War, for example, it remained untouched. So they are worried, very, very worried about Russian bombardment and the kinds of scenes we're seeing in other parts of the country. And in and around Kiev, for example, that it will happen to Lviv. So this is a city on edge, but they are continuing to host tens of thousands of people who have been arriving here from places like Mariupol. You mentioned there, the besieged city, where we're hearing devastating stories. I was just reading a report that's come out from the International Committee of the Red Cross, and one of their workers says, quote, "There's no electricity, water and gas supply, meaning no means for heating." I mean, last night it was minus 15 degrees, and they were saying children are incredibly scared. They're staying in the underground bunker. They've managed to bring some people from the city into their underground bunker. This is the ICRC, and keep the children there. And they're saying many parents are reporting that they're running out of food for their children. So the situation there is desperate. Bodies lying in the streets, thousands of bodies we're hearing lying in the streets, and nowhere to bury them. Mass graves we're hearing about as well. So really a very desperate situation. And then reports in the last hour or so that the eastern outskirts of the city have been taken over by Russian forces. And frankly, many people say that once Mariupol falls, it really is a doomed situation, because it could cut off this country from the sea. This is in many ways a country that a lot of trade takes place from those southern ports in Odessa and in Mariupol. So there is concerns that if that is cut off, it makes this country landlocked.
And Yalda, as you were saying, thousands more refugees coming into Lviv as they flee the fighting. That exodus just growing and growing. Well over 2 million people now have fled the fighting.
That's right, and half of those, Ben, are children. I mean, what's been extraordinary, I was standing outside Lviv train station the other day and just seeing the flow of people coming out of the station from places like Kharkiv and Kherson and Chernihiv and Sumy and all over the country, really, making their way to the west, whether that's by road or by train. And from that train station, I was meeting young mothers with multiple children who were just so petrified. The men in their lives left behind, their husbands, the fathers of these children. And the mothers were telling me, the mothers I spoke to, that their children are so afraid, and really the horrors that they've managed to witness in this conflict. One mother told me, "I don't know if I could ever erase the trauma that my children have witnessed the night and day bombing and shelling. She said that they were staying in their basement before they were able to get out of their city. So really tens of thousands of people arriving. But this is also a city of less than 1 million people. And I spoke to the mayor the other day who said to me, we are completely overwhelmed. We are stretched. We don't have enough supplies. We've used everything that we have, whether it's gyms or art galleries or any space, even our hotel. We have people here who have come from different parts of the country staying here, waiting and wondering when they can go home, if they can go home, and families torn apart, those who make it over the border to Poland, wondering when they can be reunited with other members of their families who have stayed behind.
Yalda Hakim there talking to me from Lviv in the west of Ukraine. Let's go to the capital now, Kyiv, and our chief international correspondent Lise Doucet is there for us. What is the feeling there tonight, Lise? What's the latest on the Russian military advance towards the capital? And indeed, what is your feeling about what are the Russian tactics?
Well, let's just tell you what we've been hearing in the skies in the last hour, Ben. There's a curfew which starts at the top of the hour at 6 GMT, and every night at about this time we do hear the kind of explosions that you've just heard. Tonight, the explosions are like rolling thunder across the sky. They're not in the centre of the city. We heard from the British Ministry of Defence today. They believe that the bulk of Russian forces on the approaches to the capital, the closest they are, is 15 miles from the city centre. But we do know that there is a smaller convoy in Brovary to the east of the city. It has been attacked by Ukrainian forces. They're using everything they have. Small infantry units are ambushing the Russians as they try to advance. They're using anti-tank missiles. They're using drones, and they're effectively keeping the Russians at bay. But there seems to be no doubt that Moscow does have this capital city in its sights, and they seem to inch ever closer while being held back not just by the Ukrainian defences, but also problems of their own making, logistical difficulties, coordination problems, a whole range of problems which are frustrating Russia's ambition to try to move ever closer to the heart of this capital.
And one wonders what Russia's and Mr. Putin's intentions towards Kyiv really are. Will they lay waste to that city in the way that they have to a city like Mariupol? It means it is such a historic city, such a cultural city with enormous importance to the Russian people, actually. You just wonder, will they try to destroy it in the way they have done other Ukrainian cities?
Ben, you asked the question that is asked by every person in this city, every Ukrainian and people abroad. Will he really try to take this capital, knowing how much history there is in this city, history that's sacred to both Ukrainians and Russians, centuries of history, knowing how much risk there is. This is a heavily fortified city, and President Putin will have seen in cities and towns across this country, it's not just the Ukrainian military which is fighting back, it's also the civilians on the home front, including thousands and thousands who have signed up to fight or who are part of conscription. Today, President Zelensky held one of his daily appearances. Today was a press conference to show to Russia he's not hiding, that it's business as usual. He's in his office. He said if President Putin was determined to take this city, he'd have to raze it to the ground. And that is why you see the diplomacy intensifying as well. But he had those phone calls with the German Chancellor, the French President, and we heard from French officials after it saying that President Putin is not willing to stop his advance. And yes, if what is happening elsewhere in other cities like Kharkiv, where there are ethnic Russians there, where there was a lot of sympathy for Russia, that neighborhoods in Kharkiv are now being razed to the ground. Cities to the south as well are meeting the same fate. Will this city be spared? That's such a big question, but judging from what I'm hearing on the horizon, there seems to be a chance that they are going to try to press on and forward towards this capital.
Lise, thank you very much indeed. Lise Doucet there, our chief international correspondent in the Ukrainian capital. Well, Lise mentioned those talks that President Putin has held with the leaders of France and Germany about the situation in Ukraine. Let's get more on that from our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Was there any progress at all, Katya, as far as we know?
I mean, from President Macron's point of view, because I asked them about these phone calls and what's the point of them, if you like, as the violence rages in Ukraine. The fact that there is still open communication is a good thing. Progress not, but it's a good thing to keep it going. It was 75 minutes of talks between himself, the German Chancellor, and Vladimir Putin today. As Lee said there, both the French and the Germans say he wasn't open to a ceasefire under realistic conditions, and in fact the Kremlin said he took the opportunity to complain about alleged violations against humanity of the Ukrainians against Russian soldiers. And Emmanuel Macron's office released pictures of him with his head in his hands after the call. So why does he do it? He's criticised by some at home and abroad as being played by Moscow, by being naive. He says, look, these calls are not his idea. They are coordinated with international allies. It's good, he says, to keep lines of communication open at the moment, to keep pressure on Russia with huge sanctions, isolating it diplomatically, helping the Ukrainian military, but providing Vladimir Putin with an off-ramp, if you like, for when he is open to a ceasefire and realistic negotiations, that there is this possibility through these calls. And that's why he said for now he wants to keep going with them.
So do we think there may be more conversations with Mr. Macron in particular and President Putin?
Absolutely. That's what President Macron told me. He held his last conversation with Vladimir Putin 48 hours ago. And if you think that it's held in coordination with international allies, these calls, it makes sense, for example, from the US perspective. They don't necessarily want Joe Biden ear to ear on a regular basis with Vladimir Putin. One of the big fears about this, bloody attack in Ukraine is that it could spread and could end up seeing NATO and Russia, huge nuclear powers, US and Russia, face to face. So this way, it's the Europeans. Emmanuel Macron has had a long-term relationship and dialogue with Vladimir Putin ever since he became president in 2017. One of his first meetings was to invite Vladimir Putin to Versailles, just outside Paris. So the Russians are willing to talk to him. And again, the international community thinks keep those lines open just in case for when Vladimir Putin is ready to end the bloodshed and to start talking realistically.
Katya, thank you very much. Katya Adler there, our Europe editor in Brussels. Well, Poland's parliament has passed emergency legislation that allows Ukrainians who are fleeing the war the right to live and work in Poland for 18 months. The refugees will receive the right to access free healthcare and education, as well as social benefits. Once registered, the refugees will be allowed to extend their legal status for up to 3 years. It's thought that so far about 1 million refugees are in Poland, most of them women and children. The bill also provides payments to Poles who host Ukrainian refugees for up to 2 months. Our correspondent Adam Easton is in Warsaw and has been telling me more about the reaction to the situation and the influx of refugees from the Polish people.
The word I would choose is sympathy, overwhelming sympathy for their neighbours who are suffering and dying in this atrocious war. And we've seen an extraordinary response from Polish society in particular. Thousands and thousands of Poles have opened up their homes to take in Ukrainians, largely women and children, and they're putting them up in their own homes. This is not the majority of people, because the majority of the estimated 1 million refugees who are thought to be in Poland now, 1.6 million have actually crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland, but it's believed that a proportion of those have now left Poland for other countries. Most of them, because Poland was home to a very large Ukrainian community, have gone to stay with family or friends, but also thousands of them, that especially in the initial wave of this refugee crisis. But that is changing, that picture now. The Warsaw mayor said that at the beginning it was about 95%, but now it's about 70% of people who are going to family and friends, and 30% have nowhere to stay. So they're reliant on Poles to put them up private homes or in these temporary accommodation centres. But that is just a temporary measure. Now, this legislation, which has been rushed through by Parliament and approved just in the last few hours, is crucial to basically legalise this enormous wave of people. For up to 3 years, they'll be able to stay in Poland, they'll be able to work in Poland. Their spouses will be able to also enjoy those same rights, even if they're not Ukrainian citizens. And their children will be able to go to Polish schools. There's already 24,000 Ukrainian children attending Polish schools just in the last couple of weeks, and there's some significant challenges there, especially with the language barrier for many of these children. But this is something that this bill addresses. It also addresses the economic needs of the Poles who are hosting Ukrainian families, because it allows them to have a daily benefit of around about $9 a day per person that they host, just to ease the pressure economically on those people who are having to spend more to host people in their homes. But it's significant. It's the biggest refugee crisis Poland has faced since the Second World War. The measures at the moment are very temporary. The big unknown is what happens is what will happen if this war continues for several months or even more, because that will put incredible strain on Polish society and on the mechanisms to house these refugees. And basically, Poland does not have the infrastructure in place to be able to accommodate this number of people for a significantly long period of time.
Adam Easton reporting there from Warsaw on the Polish reaction to that influx of refugees. Well, the latest military intelligence from Ukraine suggests Russian forces are still attempting to cut off and capture the cities of Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Mariupol and Sumy. Sumy in particular lies close to the border with Russia. And I've been talking to the regional governor of Sumy about conditions there. He says Russian forces are using brutal tactics.
The shell cities and settlements, on the other hand, take control over towns. They maraude, they rob, and they don't allow to take bodies of civilians from the street, and they don't allow to bury them.
Розміщують свою техніку між житловими будинками в приватному секторі, на вулицях, біля населених пунктів і виводять на ніч людей на вулиці, на морозі, прикриваючи
in the middle of the residential areas.
мирними громадянами.
And they use civilians as a shield, using them, getting them out in the outside and in cold weather. The terror is in the fact that the Russian invaders get those who try to find shelter in bomb shelters, they get them out, burn their houses and make them watch their houses being burned. The town of Akhtirka, the town with a rich history of Cossack history, with a population of more than 40,000 residents, destroyed, wiped out. They destroyed the ruins, the heating plant, there is no water supply, no heating supply, the windows are broken in the residential blocks of flats, and this town has disappeared within 2 weeks of this war.
Well, that was the regional governor of Sumy talking to me a little earlier on about the situation there. Let me just tell you the latest from President Zelensky of Ukraine, who has said that about 1,300 Ukrainian troops have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. He told journalists in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, that far larger numbers of Russian soldiers had died. Let's get this report from our correspondent, Frank Gardner.
It looks like, and it feels like, the beginning of the end game, although who knows how long that's going to last. If we look at the map here on day 17, The red areas are where Russian forces have taken control. In the south, they continue to make advances. They're pushing to the northwest. In the north is where the real battle is going to be fought. That's for the capital, Kyiv, around here. Now, you remember that great big Russian armoured column that was stuck for days north of the capital? Most of that has redeployed into the forests to the northwest, moving their artillery and rocket systems within range of the capital, looking to encircle it. If President Putin can't take Kyiv, then his war has failed. And that appears to be what he's determined to do, is to capture the capital. But it's not going to be an easy battle. And who knows when that assault is actually going to begin. A direct hit on a Russian armoured column as it advances on the capital, Kyiv. Western-supplied anti-tank weapons have slowed the Russian advance, but they haven't stopped it. In the air, Russian warplanes remain wary of Ukraine's air defences, but they have the advantage of numbers on their side. The latest Pentagon assessment is that the Russian Air Force is flying an average of 200 missions a day, compared to just 10 for the Ukrainians. Now, some of those Russian sorties don't even need to cross into Ukrainian airspace. They can fire their cruise missiles from inside Russian territory. This is what they're up against: Western-supplied missile systems, plus some old Soviet-era stock. The Ukrainians have shot down a number of Russian helicopters and planes. Russia has threatened to start targeting the supply of Western weaponry. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has dismissed fears that some of these weapons could end up with criminals and terrorists. We believe that risk is worth taking, says a US defense official, because the Ukrainians are fighting so skillfully with the tools at their disposal, and they're using them so creatively. President Putin has made it clear what he intends to do with any anti-aircraft missiles his forces capture from the Ukrainians. I support the possibility, he says, of giving these to the military units of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. Please do this. The Kremlin's position towards Ukraine has barely moved since the day this invasion began 2.5 weeks ago. This war can stop when you want it to. You just need to lay down your arms, surrender, give in to all our demands, and forget about being a part of Western Europe. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
You're watching BBC News.
Hello there. It's been really cold across the southeast of Europe, Greece and Turkey. The snow showers continue to low levels here through the weekend, easing a little bit in Greece. And then finally in Turkey as high pressure builds. A lot of activity taking place though through the central Mediterranean, wet and windy weather sweeping in here, and low pressures are following in behind. So what we're going to find is that with the low pressures driving southwards across Iberia, then pushing into France and across the Alps, so we'll see significant snow over the hills and some very wet weather at low levels. But even on Sunday, you can see snow to pretty low levels across Turkey. It remains really cold in Cyprus and Greece, across the Balkans as well. This is going to give some significant snow across Massif Central, the Pyrenees, the Italian, the French and the German Alps. More coming in, and the strong winds are around it as well, so some very rough conditions at sea. But there are warnings that we could see about 300 millimetres of rain for parts of southern France in the coming few days, which will lead to flash flooding, potential landslides. You can see the next one sitting across Iberia as well. Much needed rainfall in Spain, but all coming at once could also lead to some flash flooding, and it's going to affect the north of Africa too.